The city lights of Crescent City shimmered against a canopy of storm clouds, their glow refracting off the steel and glass of towering buildings. Gabriel Rowe's reflection stared back at him from the dark windows of the Equity Summit Center, a distorted version of himself that seemed as hollow as he felt. Behind him, the muffled sounds of applause trickled through the hallway doors. Another speaker, another empty promise of progress. Below, in Silver Plaza, the world felt alive. From his vantage point on the mezzanine, Gabriel could see the vibrant chaos of the protest. People carried signs demanding justice, no AI apartheid, and end algorithmic oppression. Their chants collided with the hum of automated vehicles and the synthetic commands of drones hovering overhead. Gabriel's gaze fell on a single figure in the crowd. She stood out not because of her crimson scarf, though it caught the light dramatically, but because of her stillness. Where others swayed and shouted, she stood rooted, her arms crossed over her chest, a defiant statue amidst the chaos. Her eyes, dark and piercing, seemed to challenge the very air around her. Gabriel felt a strange connection to her resolve, as if her defiance answered a question he had yet to ask himself. The sharp whine of a descending police drone pierced the plaza's cacophony. "Disperse immediately," the synthetic voice commanded, repeating the warning in multiple languages. Most of the protesters scattered, their shouts dissolving into the hum of retreating footsteps. But the woman did not move. Gabriel's breath hitched. She stood her ground, her arms uncrossed now, hands raised in what might have been surrender or defiance. The drone hovered closer, its spotlight illuminating her figure. The crowd surged again, emboldened by her defiance. Someone hurled a canister at the drone, and chaos erupted. For a moment, Gabriel felt frozen, gripped by the weight of indecision. Should he intervene? Should he join the protest, lend his voice to theirs, or would his involvement only worsen the situation? Then, the police descended, their black riot gear gleaming under the harsh light. They swept through the plaza, snatching up protesters with mechanical efficiency. Gabriel watched helplessly as the woman in the crimson scarf was dragged away, her resistance quiet but unyielding. If you're interested, don't forget to subscribe and like it. That night, Gabriel couldn't sleep. The events of the day replayed in his mind like a haunting melody. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, as fragments of the protest wove themselves into his thoughts. The chants of the crowd, the cold voice of the drone, the silent defiance of the woman in the crimson scarf, it all blended into a cacophony he couldn't ignore. In the morning, he tried to distract himself with work. His satchel lay unopened by his desk, its contents, the proposal he had spent years perfecting, mocking him. The plan was supposed to be his contribution to the fight for equity, a blueprint for dismantling systemic inequality through policy and technology. But now, it felt inadequate. The woman's defiance had exposed a truth he didn't want to face. Words and ideas were not enough. Not anymore. Unable to focus, Gabriel wandered the streets of Crescent City. The vibrancy of the city, its towering skyscrapers and bustling markets, felt like a veneer hiding something rotten. Everywhere he looked, he saw the same patterns, the neighborhoods divided by race and class, the AI-driven systems perpetuating inequality under the guise of efficiency, the silent despair of those the city had abandoned. He found himself back at Silver Plaza, now eerily quiet. The banners and signs had been removed, the broken glass swept away, but the air still hummed with the tension of the previous day. Gabriel stood at the edge of the fountain, staring into the water as if it held answers. The plaza reminded him of Grayford, the industrial town where he had grown up. Grayford wasn't a place for dreams, it was a place for survival. Gabriel's father worked long shifts at the factory, coming home with his hands blackened from oil and his lungs heavy with dust. Gabriel had escaped that life through education, a scholarship to a prestigious university, pulling him out of Grayford's grasp. But not everyone had been so lucky. He thought of Marcus, his best friend. Marcus had been brilliant, smarter than Gabriel even, but brilliance didn't protect him from Grayford's inequalities. Marcus's life had unraveled the day he was expelled for defending himself against a bully. Gabriel had watched helplessly as Marcus's mother shouted at the principal, her voice breaking under the weight of injustice. "We all wear chains. Some of us just have the gall to rattle them." Those words had stayed with Gabriel, though he hadn't understood their full meaning until now. Watching the woman in the crimson scarf, he felt the same pang of helplessness he had felt that day. He had escaped Grayford, but Marcus had not, and now, decades later, Gabriel was still on the sidelines, watching others fight battles he couldn't or wouldn't engage in. 2 days later, Gabriel saw her again. This time, she was sitting on the steps of the public library, her crimson scarf replaced by a weathered leather jacket. She was reading a book, her brow furrowed in concentration. Gabriel hesitated, unsure whether to approach her. What could he possibly say to her? That he admired her courage? That he envied it? Before he could decide, she looked up, her eyes locking onto his. "You're the man from the balcony," she said, her voice steady but curious. Gabriel blinked. "You saw me?" She closed her book, a small smirk playing on her lips. "Hard to miss. You look like someone deciding whether to jump or maybe drop something heavy." The comment caught him off guard, and he chuckled nervously. "Not jumping," he said quickly. "I was. Watching." "Of course you were," she replied, her tone sharp but not unkind. "People like you always are." Her words stung, though Gabriel couldn't quite explain why. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you're one of them," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the Equity Summit Center in the distance. "The ones who talk about change but never actually do anything about it." Gabriel opened his mouth to respond, but she cut him off. "Don't bother denying it. I've seen enough to know when someone's here to spectate." Gabriel took a deep breath. "I'm not just watching, I've been working on." He hesitated, unsure how to explain. "I've been working on a proposal to address systemic inequality. A way to fix the system from the inside," she interrupted, her tone dripping with skepticism. "Good luck with that." Gabriel bristled. "What do you suggest then? Burning it all down?" She leaned back, her gaze never wavering. "Maybe. Or maybe you stop pretending the system can be fixed at all. Sometimes you have to build something new." The conversation left Gabriel unsettled. Her words forced him to confront an uncomfortable truth, that his belief in reform might be little more than a comfortable illusion. But what was the alternative? Chaos? Anarchy? And yet, a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that she was right. Gabriel's days became a blur of routine, meetings with stakeholders, refining his proposal, and pretending everything was normal. But something had shifted. Every polished graph, every carefully worded report felt hollow. He couldn't stop thinking about the woman, her unwavering defiance, her biting words. "Stop pretending the system can be fixed at all." That weekend, he found himself wandering Crescent City again, drawn to the library where they had spoken. He didn't expect to find her there, but as if summoned by his thoughts, she emerged from the shadows of the plaza, her leather jacket catching the dim streetlight. "You again," she said, her lips curling into a faint smile. "Didn't expect you to come back." Gabriel hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I wanted to understand," he said finally, "what you're fighting for, what drives you." She studied him for a moment, then gestured for him to follow. "Come on," she said. "You want to understand? Let me show you. If you're interested, don't forget to subscribe and like it." Alara led Gabriel through the city's underbelly, a maze of forgotten alleys, abandoned factories, and hidden meeting spots. They arrived at a nondescript warehouse, its windows boarded up and its exterior covered in faded graffiti. Inside, the space was alive with activity. People hunched over computers, piecing together data from hacked police networks. Others were building drones, assembling components with meticulous precision. "This is the network," Alara said, her voice steady but filled with pride. "We don't just protest, we resist. Every algorithm that targets a minority neighborhood, every drone that patrols our streets, we dismantle it, piece by piece." Gabriel's eyes widened as he took in the scene. "You're hacking the city?" "We're reclaiming it," she corrected. "Do you know what it feels like to be watched, tracked, judged, and punished by a machine that doesn't see you as human? That's the world we live in. And if we don't fight back, it will only get worse." As Alara introduced him to the network, Gabriel couldn't help but feel both awe and unease. These were ordinary people, teachers, engineers, students, using extraordinary means to challenge the system. They weren't criminals, but they operated outside the law. Could justice be served through such methods? Or was this simply another form of chaos? One of the members, a wiry man named Malik, approached Gabriel with a smirk. "So you're the reformer," he said, his tone laced with skepticism. "Let me guess. You think we're going too far?" Gabriel bristled. "I think you're doing what you believe is right." Malik's smirk deepened. "Diplomatic answer. Let me make it simple for you. The system doesn't care about your proposals. You want to change things? You're going to have to get your hands dirty." That night, Gabriel stayed longer than he intended, listening to the stories of the people in the network. There was Nadia, a single mother whose son had been detained by an AI-driven police unit for loitering outside their apartment. There was Arun, a software developer, who had uncovered evidence that predictive policing algorithms were specifically designed to target low-income areas. Their stories ignited something in Gabriel, a sense of urgency, a realization that his proposal, no matter how well crafted, might never see the light of day. And yet, joining the network felt like crossing a line he wasn't ready to cross. As the night wore on, Alara approached him. "You don't have to decide now," she said, her tone softer than before. "But know this, the system won't change unless we make it change. If you're not willing to fight, then you're part of the problem." The following week, Gabriel found himself standing in a darkened alley, his heart pounding in his chest. He had agreed to accompany Alara and the network on a mission, not to hack or sabotage, but to observe. They were targeting a police drone control hub, a facility where algorithms were fine-tuned and deployed across the city. "This isn't about destruction," Alara explained as they crouched behind a shipping container. "It's about exposure. We're going to pull the data logs, show the world how these machines really work." As they moved through the shadows, Gabriel's nerves prickled with every sound. The facility was eerily quiet, its automated security systems humming softly in the background. Malik and Nadia worked quickly, bypassing firewalls and extracting data onto a portable drive. Gabriel watched, a mix of fascination and dread coursing through him. Then the alarms went off. Red lights bathed the room as sirens blared. Malik swore under his breath, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "Someone tipped them off," he growled. "We've got company." Alara's face hardened. "Gabriel, move. We have to go now." As they fled through the labyrinthine corridors, Gabriel's mind raced. Who had betrayed them? And why? He barely had time to process the thought before they burst into the night, pursued by drones and armed guards. The group scattered, each taking a different route to avoid capture. Gabriel found himself running through the darkened streets, his breath ragged and his heart pounding. He had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. The hum of a drone grew louder behind him, its spotlight sweeping the alleyway. Just as it closed in, Alara appeared, grabbing his arm and pulling him into a hidden passage. "You're lucky I came back for you," she said, her voice sharp but laced with relief. "Next time, keep up. If you found this interesting, be sure to subscribe to the channel and listen to the full story. And if you've seen or experienced something similar, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. All the best to you." Back at the safe house, the mood was grim. The mission had been compromised and the data they retrieved was incomplete. Suspicion hung heavy in the air, and Gabriel could feel the weight of their disappointment. Alara confronted him later, her eyes blazing. "Did you tell anyone about this? Anyone outside the network?" "No," Gabriel said quickly. "I wouldn't." "Then how did they know?" she demanded. "Someone tipped them off, and until we figure out who, no one is safe." Gabriel's stomach churned. He hadn't betrayed them, not intentionally, but the possibility that his presence had drawn attention to the network gnawed at him. Had his involvement endangered the very people he wanted to help? The safe house was silent, except for the low hum of computers. The tension in the air was palpable. Gabriel sat in the corner, his thoughts racing as the others debated the fallout of the mission. Malik paced the room, his voice sharp with frustration. "This was too clean to be random," he said, slamming a fist on the table. "Someone tipped them off." Alara sat at the head of the table, her eyes dark and unreadable. "We need to focus on securing what's left of our operations," she said, her tone firm but calm. "Panic won't help us now." Gabriel's stomach churned. The weight of Malik's suspicion bore down on him. He knew he hadn't betrayed them intentionally, but his inexperience and carelessness could have made him a liability. He looked up, meeting Alara's gaze. She held his eyes for a moment, then nodded slightly, a silent assurance that she didn't blame him. Yet, that night, Gabriel couldn't sleep. He sat alone in the darkened safe house, staring at his hands. He had always prided himself on being meticulous, careful, deliberate. But here, in the real fight for justice, his caution felt like cowardice. His mind drifted back to Marcus. He remembered the day Marcus was expelled from school. Gabriel had wanted to defend him, to stand by his side as he faced the principal's wrath, but fear had paralyzed him. He'd watched silently as Marcus and his mother left the school, their shoulders heavy with defeat. Gabriel clenched his fists, the memory stinging anew. I failed him then. I can't fail now. In the days that followed, Gabriel noticed a shift in the group. Conversations grew quieter when he entered the room. Malik avoided his gaze, while others exchanged furtive glances. The weight of suspicion hung over him like a cloud. Elara remained his only ally, though her patience seemed to be wearing thin. One evening she confronted him in the safe house's makeshift kitchen. "Do you know what trust means to these people?" she asked, her voice low but firm. "It's not just about loyalty. It's about survival. If we can't trust each other, we're dead." Gabriel looked down, shame burning in his chest. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said. "But if I'm a liability, maybe I shouldn't be here." Elara sighed, rubbing her temples. "Walking away isn't the answer, Gabriel. But you need to understand something. This fight isn't about you. It's about all of us. So figure out where you stand, because we don't have time to carry dead weight." Her words cut deep, but they also lit a fire in Gabriel. He couldn't undo the past, but he could prove himself. He just didn't know how. The network soon learned of a new opportunity, a high-profile data center storing sensitive information about Crescent City's predictive policing program. The data could expose systemic bias and corruption on an unprecedented scale, but the mission was risky, far more dangerous than anything Gabriel had been part of before. Malik was quick to oppose Gabriel's involvement. "He almost got us killed last time," he said. "We can't risk it." Elara intervened. "If Gabriel wants to make this right, this is his chance, but the decision isn't mine alone." She looked around the room, her gaze sweeping over the group. After a tense silence, Nadia spoke. "Let him come. If he screws up, it's on him." The others murmured their agreement, though Malik's scowl remained fixed. Gabriel nodded, determined. "I won't let you down." The team spent days preparing for the mission, mapping out entry points, studying security protocols, and rehearsing their escape routes. Gabriel threw himself into the planning, desperate to prove his worth. He memorized floor plans, learned to bypass firewalls, and practiced disabling drones with makeshift tools. The night of the mission, the group gathered in a dimly lit warehouse, their faces shadowed with tension. Elara stood at the center, her voice steady as she outlined the plan. "We get in, extract the data, and get out. No unnecessary risks. If anything goes wrong, we regroup at the fallback point. Stay sharp." Gabriel nodded along with the others, his heart pounding. This wasn't just about the mission, it was about redemption. If you're interested, don't forget to subscribe and like it. The data center loomed ahead, a sleek fortress of steel and glass. The team approached under the cover of darkness, their movements precise and practiced. Gabriel followed Elara closely, his nerves on edge. Inside, the operation went smoothly at first. Malik and Nadia worked quickly to bypass the building's security systems, while Elara coordinated their efforts. Gabriel kept watch, his senses hyper-alert. But just as they began extracting the data, an alarm blared. "Security breach detected," a synthetic voice announced. "Lockdown initiated." Panic rippled through the group. Malik cursed under his breath. "We need to move, now." Elara grabbed the portable drive, stuffing it into her bag. "Follow me," she barked. As they fled through the labyrinthine corridors, Gabriel noticed something strange. The guards seemed to anticipate their movements, cutting off escape routes with eerie precision. It was as if someone had fed them the team's exact plans. They barely made it out, scattering into the night. Back at the safe house, tempers flared. "This isn't just bad luck," Malik said, his voice sharp. "Someone sold us out." Alara's eyes narrowed. "Who?" Malik's gaze fell on Gabriel. "He's the outsider, the weak link. It has to be him." Gabriel's stomach dropped. "I didn't. Enough," Elara snapped, silencing them both. "We'll figure this out. But right now, we need to secure the data." Over the next few days, the network worked tirelessly to analyze the stolen data. The information was explosive. Detailed reports of how predictive policing algorithms disproportionately targeted minority neighborhoods, reinforcing systemic inequality under the guise of efficiency. Gabriel felt a flicker of hope. If they could release this data, it could spark widespread outrage and force meaningful change. But the shadow of suspicion still loomed over him. One night, Elara found him sitting alone, staring at the glowing screen of his laptop. "You're quiet," she said, pulling up a chair. "I'm thinking about what comes next," Gabriel replied. "If this data gets out, it could change everything. But what if it's not enough?" Elara leaned back, her expression thoughtful. "It's never enough, Gabriel. Change doesn't come from a single action. It comes from persistence, from people who refuse to give up, even when it feels impossible." Gabriel nodded slowly, her words sinking in. For the first time, he felt a glimmer of clarity. This wasn't just about fixing the system, it was about fighting for something bigger than himself. The safe house buzzed with urgency as the network scrambled to prepare the stolen data for release. Gabriel sat at a corner desk, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he helped compile the reports. The findings were damning. Detailed logs of AI algorithms identifying neighborhoods by racial composition, emails between city officials discussing how to optimize control zones, and evidence of corporate incentives tied to arrests. The weight of the information pressed heavily on Gabriel. He thought of the families whose lives had been upended, the communities targeted by a system designed to keep them marginalized. It wasn't just data, it was the raw truth of an unjust world. Ilara approached, her expression a mix of determination and exhaustion. "How's it coming?" "We're close," Gabriel said, glancing at her. "But if we're going to release this, we need to do it right. We need a strategy." Ilara nodded. "That's why we're staging a public broadcast. If we control the narrative, they can't bury the truth." The network devised an ambitious plan: hijack a live city broadcast and replace it with their exposé. It was risky, an act of rebellion that could land them all in prison, but the stakes were too high to back down. The group worked around the clock, coordinating technical logistics and preparing statements. Gabriel found himself at the center of the operation, drafting a speech to accompany the data. Ilara reviewed it with him, her sharp eye catching every potential weakness. "You're not just speaking for yourself," she said. "You're speaking for everyone who's been silenced. Make it count." As the broadcast approached, Gabriel grappled with doubts. Could he, a man who had spent most of his life on the sidelines, truly represent the voices of the oppressed? His privilege weighed heavily on him, a constant reminder of the chasm between his experience and theirs. He thought of Marcus again, of the promise he had made to himself after that fateful day in Greyford. "Never again will I stay silent in the face of injustice." This was his chance to make good on that promise. The night of the broadcast arrived, shrouded in tension. The network infiltrated the city's central communications hub, bypassing security with a combination of technical prowess and sheer nerve. Gabriel sat in the makeshift studio, his palms sweating as the countdown began. 3-2-1, Ilara said, her voice steady. The screen flickered, and Gabriel's face appeared across Crescent City's airwaves. He took a deep breath, his voice firm as he began. "My name is Gabriel Rowe, and what you're about to see is the truth." He presented the data with precision, highlighting the system's corruption and the devastating impact on marginalized communities. As he spoke, he felt a shift within himself, a growing resolve, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt before. The broadcast ended with a powerful call to action. We can no longer accept a world where justice is an algorithm written to oppress. The time for change is now. The broadcast sent shockwaves through the city. Protests erupted overnight, drawing massive crowds to Silver Plaza and beyond. Social media buzzed with outrage, and news outlets scrambled to cover the story. The city's leadership, caught off guard, issued vague statements promising an investigation, but the network's victory was short-lived. The next day, the safe house was raided. Gabriel and the others barely escaped, scattering into the city's shadows. For Gabriel, it was a harsh reminder of the system's reach and its willingness to silence dissent. In the aftermath of the raid, the group regrouped in a hidden location. Tensions ran high as they debated their next move. Malik's suspicions flared again, his accusations against Gabriel growing louder. "Every time he's involved, something goes wrong," Malik said. "We need to cut him loose before he gets us all killed." Gabriel felt his chest tighten. "I've done nothing but help this group," he said, his voice steady. "If you have proof, say it. Otherwise, stop pointing fingers." Ilara stepped in, her voice cutting through the tension. "Enough. We don't have time for this. Whoever betrayed us will find out, but right now, we need to stay focused." Later that night, Gabriel discovered the truth. One of the network's members, Arun, had been leaking information to the authorities. Confronting Arun was a painful moment. He was a man Gabriel had trusted, someone who had seemed as committed to the cause as anyone. "I didn't have a choice," Arun said, his voice trembling. "They threatened my family. I'm sorry." Gabriel felt a surge of anger, but also understanding. The system didn't just oppress, it forced good people to make impossible choices. When he told Ilara, her expression hardened. "We can't let this divide us," she said. "If we start turning on each other, they win." With Arun's betrayal exposed, the group rallied for one final mission: The broadcast had galvanized public support, but it wasn't enough. They needed irrefutable proof, something that would force the city's leadership to act. The target, the headquarters of the corporation behind the AI algorithms. Inside its vaults lay the original code, the smoking gun that could expose the systemic bias embedded in the technology. The mission was the most dangerous yet, requiring precision, courage, and luck. As they prepared, Gabriel felt a mix of fear and determination. This was the moment everything had been building toward. The infiltration began smoothly, the group moving like a well-oiled machine. But as they reached the vault, alarms blared. Guards swarmed the building, cutting off their escape routes. Alara turned to Gabriel, her eyes fierce. "We're not leaving without the code." Gabriel nodded, his heart pounding. "Let's finish this." The next moments were a blur of action, Gabriel downloading the files as Alara and the others held off the guards. Just as the download completed, a drone fired, its shot grazing Alara's arm. Gabriel grabbed her, pulling her toward the exit. "We're not losing anyone tonight," he said, his voice firm. The group escaped with the code, but not without cost. Alara's injury left her weakened, and several members of the network were arrested during the chaos. Gabriel felt the weight of their sacrifice as they returned to the safe house, the stolen files clutched tightly in his hands. The final release of the code was explosive. It confirmed everything the network had claimed and more. Public outrage reached a boiling point, forcing the city's leadership to halt AI policing programs and launch a full investigation. For Gabriel, it was a bittersweet victory. The fight had cost so much, and the road ahead was still uncertain. But for the first time, he felt hope, a belief that change was possible. Months later, Gabriel stood in Silver Plaza, watching as a diverse crowd gathered to celebrate the city's first true steps toward equity. Alara stood beside him, her arm in a sling but her spirit unbroken. "This is just the beginning," she said, her voice filled with quiet conviction. Gabriel nodded. "And this time, I'm not watching from the sidelines." The story ends on a hopeful note, with Gabriel and Alara ready to face the challenges ahead together. If you found this interesting, be sure to subscribe to the channel and listen to the full story. And if you've seen or experienced something similar, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. All the best to you.